Well, when I entered the school district, it was already desegregated. And around the time that I started elementary school, till the time that I graduated from high school, it was desegregated. But the issue, I think, for me in terms of explaining that is that I'm very light-skinned. So when the 60s had come and gone and Black pride was like at the forefront, then people of my complexion had to prove their blackness in the school district or in the classroom. So I'm not speaking for everyone, but my experience was that I just had to be a little bit more informed about Black issues, about what was going on, and it made it more comfortable to be in an entirely Black school for me. And then in the about 74, 72 or 73, I was transferred, or my parents took me out of the high school where I attended, and I was sent to, or was admitted to a school here called Loretto, and it was at 124th and Warnell, and it was integrated. It was an integrated Catholic school, and that's where I completed my high school days, because it was just, I was being distracted from my work because of my, I think because of the pressure that comes from trying to fit in. Well, a lot of efforts were put in later on, I guess, even after the busing, because during the 60s, when you had a lot of the white flight, and the people who lived in the inner city or the urban communities, they moved out to suburbia. But Blacks then had a lot of pride in their property. I'm not saying that we don't, but it was more prevalent in all the communities that I lived in, and I lived in a couple with my family. But we also had teachers who lived across the street from us that we saw at our elementary school, and we saw the principal at church. So it was a neighborhood and a community where everybody knew each other, so everybody felt comfortable with their kids walking to school together. And that was one of the highlights that I really enjoyed coming up, is that everybody knew each other. And teachers in the Black community were looked at as very high and respected because of their educational background and because of what they did in terms of teaching and educating the kids. And we still think of it as a really prestigious position. The community was kind of divided on this, because some people wanted the desegregation or the integration, and some people did not, because it did not only break down the schools and the communities and the neighborhoods, but also the businesses. Because in the early years, 18th and Vine was hustling and bustling with a lot of the businesses. And when integration came in, and this is one of the things that my dad talks about all the time, Black people stopped really trading in the city and started going to places where they couldn't go before. So the people that they were normally trading with or doing business with were going out of business. You know, you had a lot of cab services here that were owned by Blacks. You had a lot of the car dealerships that were owned by Blacks. You had pharmaceuticals or pharmacies that were on the corner that were owned by Blacks. So a lot of the things that businesses that were there are no longer there. Never did come back. Only thing that I can tell you is that when you had the integration, the white teachers tended to either retire or go to suburbia or go other places where they felt more comfortable. Black teachers were more in flux, but you had doctors who were teachers. There weren't just teachers who had like degrees in teaching, but they also were doctors. Principals of schools were African American or Black doctors of education, and these were very prestigious places to be and positions to have. But the integration and the attitudes of maybe a student or somebody like myself, in terms of after you had the riots in the 60s and everybody started being a little bit more liberal or accepting, then you could see how the Black Panthers or the SAC 20 and all of these inner city groups came and started flourishing and dealing with political issues. Even at a integrated Catholic school where I attended, you know, I got along with people because I didn't really have a problem socializing. But when you talked to maybe a white friend who was talking about what does the Black Panthers mean or what does, you know, SAC 20 mean, I was looking at it as people who lived in the community that were trying to help those people who were disenfranchised or not able to provide certain services for themselves. So everybody had to talk and have a conversation to be on the same wavelength, so you wouldn't have stereotypical conversations based on race, or you would have more informed conversations once you had that integration. Well, it was mixed also. Some people didn't have a problem with it. Some people did have a problem with it, but there were some people who did not want it at all. I mean, that's historical. I mean, no, some people didn't want their schools integrated, and that's why you had the white flight, and you had people moving out, and then you had the communities just became black. It's just that people did not understand, so there was no conversation leading up to this, where you had a public forum where people could discuss issues that they were concerned about. It was just, this is going to happen. So students really felt like their voices weren't really recognized, and a lot of times people didn't get a chance to articulate how they felt, because this is just something that happened to them without their permission or understanding. Well, my participation was when I went to an integrated school, okay? And that way I was a good student. That's how I made my contribution. Wherever I went, I tried to get involved in the school and what they offered and what the extracurricular was. I met a lot of people. I'm still friends with some of them today, and it was a high school. So I'm easy to get along with, more times than not, but I do have my opinions that are pretty strong about being able to converse even with people who are not able to articulate what it is that they're feeling about you being different. And sometimes you have to be in intimate settings in order for people to even open up and say what some of their feelings are, because the media was not portraying black people in a very positive manner. So if that's all you're getting, then your whole idea of what a black person is was skewed. So I think once people started articulating and were able to understand that we're all the same with the same goals, is taking care of our families, getting a good education and so forth, then I think things started to mellow out a little bit. The schools were already integrated, so I didn't really, the only thing, like I mentioned before, when there was afros, okay, dashikis, and it was a lot of black power and a lot of conversation, and you know, and James Brown came out with his songs and we all danced to him. I wasn't black enough by my skin tone, so I had to learn to adjust. And I think, and I might be wrong, but I tend to think that that's why Angela Davis became who she was, or Nikki Giovanni became who she was, or some of the Soul Dad brothers, even Huey Newton. They're all light-skinned people. And so I think they had to even prove themselves even being more a part of the movement than people who did not have to explain because they were darker in hue. You know what, I think academic outcomes may have been good when we had teachers who really were concerned about our education, but once you go to a school where you're having to deal with a lot of other issues other than just learning a subject, it becomes more difficult to retain the information. That's one of the things that I was happy when my parents took me out of the public school system and put me into a private school, because I didn't have to concentrate on those things as much in order to excel. Well, socialization, as you can see, has really flourished a lot, and people are not uncomfortable with different cultures. And I think that the cultural context should be explained anyway in a classroom setting, so that people can get more, not just about what a black person may think or do, but also black studies, just like you have your other studies. I think Indian studies or Arabic studies or whatever. I think that it should be a cultural context that is transferred into the school system so that people can get a better understanding of who they're sitting next to, since it has become sort of a melting pot. Well, it did shape it because it separated everyone, basically. You still have the majority of African Americans or blacks still in the same areas that they were in at the time that the desegregation happened, and white people have moved out into suburban areas or further west or south. And these are the things that have not really changed that much until you have like gerrymandering, or you have some type of disenfranchisement because of economic development and so forth. These things happened because now we're trying to get people back into the city, and some people want to come back into the city. But I think that that integration had a good intention, but all of the results were not as favorable. I think that students need to have a lot more pride. I think we're missing the pride that we had when I was in school. I think when people are really excited about themselves and about their accomplishments, then they do better if they are focused on what their future may hold. But I don't believe that that's happening at this particular time because of the rates of people who are not graduating. And also, I don't know if it's a place for me to say, but it's also a crazy idea to understand that now you have high schools that have daycare centers in them. So I don't know if the focus is in the right direction. It's not for me to criticize. I'm just making an observation. So it's, for me, it's just kind of difficult to see when I remember the schools having so much pride. You had 300 or 400 kids graduating at a class. Now it's like 80 or 100, maybe even, but not those big classes that I remembered from when I was a teenager, and it's just difficult to watch. Well, I think that the integration part is good if you allow people to go where they want to go. I don't think people should be forced to go to a particular school. I think it should be a natural kind of thing. If you're interested in a certain school, I think you should have an opportunity to go there. But it has been a forced issue, and I think that's what has brought about a lot of the issues that have not been resolved even to date.